So this is really an exciting opportunity because the person who we are interviewing tonight is Dr. EJ Zebro. And he's a very special person to me, as many of my friends know, because he has been my personal trainer and chiropractor for the past 20 years.
Hard to believe.
You were only 10 when we first got started. And we have learned and grown together. We've learned a lot together about the mind-body connection, and I've learned a lot about how to think about that. He has been influenced by learning about habits of mind and wanting to see how that works with his work. So he is the co-founder of a holistic gym, and it's in Westport, Connecticut. That might not surprise you. And we're going to talk tonight about his work with the gathering data with all senses, because that's very much at the very heart of what he does. But in order to do that, I thought we might begin by just asking a little bit about how you think about the mind-body connection and what importance it has to you as you think about all this work.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for the last decades of us learning and growing with one another. It's been, you've been certainly the most influential client in my life. And it goes back to our initial encounters together and all the amazing questions that you would ask me all the time about why are we doing this, and what are we doing, and how is this benefiting me? And it really made me think. And then you also taught me about thinking about my thinking, and which I already did a lot of that, but you helped me to be a little more focused on that. So I would say the mind-body connection for me 20 years ago was almost non-existent. I graduated with a very specific approach in biomechanics and working with athletes and movement, and they were kind of separate in my mind, and my education really focused on keeping things separate. But as I started growing into the practice and dealing with more and more clients with issues on emotional, social fronts, it was not in their best interest or mine to ignore that there wasn't a connection. And now the thought of saying that I thought the mind and body were separate ever seems crazy to me. The thought of having conversations with very educated people talking about, well, they're two very separate things, also seems crazy to me. But I can see where, for some people, separating them at different times to focus on exercises and weights and strength may make sense. But the work that we do and we have always done is, my view is getting you to be more aware of your body. So not only when you're in front of me and moving that you can make those connections, but when you're outside of the gym that you can, pun intended, tap into these same movements and have them apply not only to stepping up and down off curbs or stages, or how do they affect your interpersonal relationships as well in the way you carry yourself with your posture and your breathing. And so for me now, the mind and body clearly are one thing. They are always connected, and we can, second time on the pun, tap into those processes and have them grow with us through simple movements like a lunge, or something more complex in a multi-joint movement.
And of course, when you say pun, people may not know why you say pun, but it's because this gym is called TAP.
Correct.
And what we do when we're here and we work out is we both tap in and tap out. We tap into all of these senses, and then we tap out when we walk out, and we remember them, and our muscle memory is in there. And what really struck me as being so interesting was how much metacognition there is, how much there is the thinking about your thinking and the body awareness. And so you probably know, because I told you, that we focused on one of our habits of mind in one of our sessions. It was gathering data with all the senses, as you well know. And I was excited because when we first started talking about it, we were talking about it as the senses, eyes, ears, nose, the way we teach it to young children today. But then Art wrote at one point and said, Art Costa wrote at one point and said, there's so much new material out on the senses. And let's just dig into it and take a fresh look. And he wrote about what I see behind me, which is the senses, the way you talk about it. So I wonder, could you just help us make that special connection of what you mean when you say the senses from the perspective that you use it?
Sure. This came about for many years of discussing what sort of method we have at TAP and to put that on paper. And I was resistant to it for many years because we take such an individualistic approach. And the approach that I take with you and others changes day by day based on how you're presenting, what's going on in your life. What sort of stress do you have in your life? What sort of physical pain do you have in your life? And then it became clear that not everyone can come to Westport. Not everyone can have this one-on-one experience. So how do we take this and how do we create something that's a little bit more scalable, but also rooted in science, not just my own intuition and those that I've trained under this approach, as I like to call it. So we started thinking about what it is that we do and to help people be more aware of their bodies and make that connection of mind and body. We started saying, well, what are the things that make up one's body awareness? And one of the things that makes up that is interoception and some of the work that I read from Art, which is excellent and right along the lines that we do. So we break that down as what do I feel in my body and where do I feel that? Am I feeling stressed? Do I feel that in my chest? Do I feel it more on the left side or my right side? And just a quick body scan to tell you what you feel and how you're about to approach the movement, the hour that we spend together, and what do we want to focus on. We also look at exteroception. So those we determine are the senses around you, what you see. And in the gym, that could just be like, what do you see when you look in the mirror? How are you presenting that day? Are you presenting in a way that you're more protected and fight or flight? Are you open and spilling all over the place and you have a lack of stability? What's going on with what you're hearing, what you're seeing, even smelling, tasting to a degree, but those external senses, what makes up our exterior world and how do we process that on the inside? And then of course, here we work a lot with people that have some kind of like pain or limitation or imbalance. So that'd be nociception, not just what kind of pain you're in, but what is your perception of that pain? Is it limiting you? Are you scared of it? Is it unstable? Is it sharp shooting? How is it affecting you? And then the last one is proprioception. So proprioception, just where our body exists in time and space and our understanding of that is, we look at it as the sixth sense. And there's really interesting work being done now about fascia and the fascial connections and how this web of fascia in this organ that we've discarded in dissections for decades, now we're starting to say, this is a really important structure that tells us where we are in time and space and make these connections from our tips of our fingers all the way down to our toes. So there's a strong component of the manual therapy work that we do to change the fascial connections, to change the proprioception, to then move people into the loops of movement, making these connections through interoception, exteroception, nociception, and proprioception.
So that's quite exceptional.
It's a lot of sections.
A lot of sections. So one of the things that I was wanting to play around a little with you on is, as you know, most of our audience probably are educators. Mm-hmm. And we're very interested in this. For example, kids who need to find that place for themselves in order to be ready for learning. Mm-hmm. So you've taught me, and I'm interested in how you might see some of that transfer to kids. You've taught me that one of the most important things, among many, is when I move from one place to another, find my center, stop for a minute, be stable, find my center. And I've told many people that one of the things that you talk about is stability before mobility. So find yourself first. And that's where you're finding yourself. Like if you look around, if you see what's up and what's down, if you begin to get a sense of where you are, you can move your body with more confidence than if you just jump up and go. How might we get kids to realize the importance of that?
So to try to keep me on point, I'm going to stick to two main ways that I see. And one is a way that's commonplace and being used often in just a body scan that is used in psychotherapy and somatic healing and just scanning your body, again, feeling what you're feeling and using the breath as a tool, as a bridge between our central nervous system and our autonomic nervous system. So what we have to think about when we do and move and breathe is more centrally programmed. But then we know we're going to breathe on our own and we don't have to think about it, right? So that's that autonomic, that unconscious component of our body. So an easy way to do that, relatively, is to get clients, students, children, my daughter, connected to their breath and really get them to understand how they can not only control that in speed and depth and volume, but almost can they place it in their body. And it's a great yogi skill that they talked about that, again, in all of my yoga years. At first I was like, I'm pretty sure I can't put my breath in the bottom left corner of the posterior side of my lung, but let's try it. And it created this challenge to see just how much control I was of my breath when I really didn't think I had much. So that's one. I think the breath is a huge component that we all have access to, and it's somewhat accessible, I think, for most children. Although, again, children isn't the bulk of my practice. But years ago, when I was really focusing on working with athletes and youth athletes and trying to get them to be more preventative in their approach of injuries, and soccer, which is what I played in college and what my love was for so many years, what we started doing with them was using foam rollers and getting them to find adhesions in their bodies before they were there. And so a whole group of 20 kids on a football field, soccer field, and getting them to use these foam rollers and say, do you feel that? So that tightness, that could be something that's slowing you down that you're not even aware of yet. And it brings me to, I think, one of the largest pieces that's missing, certainly in healthcare, in a large healthcare delivery system, is hands-on healing. And even teaching people how to touch themselves. What is it like? Starting with the hands, kind of working from, the upper extremity up to the head, or the head down to the arms, or lower, and making this connection and this story through touch. And I think that's a great way to start that conversation.
So the story through touch, and by the way, if you have any questions or you would like to chat with us in any way, just put it in the chat and we will try to be responsive if you're curious about what we're saying. But one of the things that I'm interested in is I see kids today so stressed, and they often come to school with a tremendous amount of stress. And then the new learning that they have to take the hurdle of gets them even more so. And I'm just wondering whether I see a lot of programs where they do things like tapping. I saw somebody doing this tapping at one point. Mm-hmm. What are some of those strategies? Are they meaningful? And how does a kid put that in their heads, I guess, is the question I have more than anything.
Yeah, so some of that I think would be answered better by more of a neuroscientist, and someone that can tell you how those tools kind of create circuit shortcuts to the brain. That I don't know. But what I do know is this, all of us growing up, our parents, usually our mother, would tell us to stand up straight. We're slouching, have better posture. And in school, we learned hundreds of hours of ways to do exercises to help people with their posture. And that kind of worked. And this is something that we worked on. What really works is to be in control of your breath, because that kid who's stressed, they're in that protected position, fight or flight. They're vulnerable and they don't want to be. So it's their way of protecting themselves. And if you can get them to open up, and opening up through movement is one way, but opening up through the breath becomes something that's more unconscious, and they can tap into that, and it can change their posture really without them having to think about it. And the more they practice this, and we've talked about this, about the creation of new neural pathways and neural budding, can happen with this amazing shortcut through the breath. And it's so powerful from people that have acute low back spasms. If you just get them to breathe into that and relax and get out of that protected state, then you can begin the healing process and show them how to heal themselves. And it's the same thing with my now 13-year-old daughter. If I can just get her to slow down and breathe, all of a sudden she's open to conversation and listening. But the breath is really the best shortcut for me, because it becomes something that becomes unconscious and creates this new habit that they first tap into that breath to set the tone. Just like you standing to get off the table and align yourself before you start moving, you set the tone for what comes next instead of just kind of running into it head first.
So let's play it. So let's assume that I'm a teacher in a classroom. That wouldn't be a reach. And that I want the kids to have a readiness. In the same way I get off the table and I center myself, how might I have kids have a readiness for a complex math problem, for example?
As you know, this varies from classroom to classroom. You know, I spent the main job that I had my entire life was coaching little kids playing soccer. So I've had a lot of these little rambunctious kids running around of a variety of ages. I like the approach of grounding, right? So when you came in here tonight, you know, you saw me standing on a foam roller or a wobble board, and that's my way of just like grounding to get ready for whatever we're going to do and how we're going to play and have fun. So I like the idea of starting with that classroom and saying, okay, let's start with our feet. All right, our feet are on the ground, or you know, everyone's feet are flat on the ground. Now, let's take a deep breath in. Breathe in through the nose. Try to do that for 5 seconds. Hold on to that for 1 second, then slowly exhale and maintain that contact with your feet on the ground. And do that about 5 times. I realize we got a small span to make an impact here, but if we can get them to make that connection, okay, I understand I'm breathing in and out through my nose. I'm sitting up straight. My feet are firmly planted on the ground. We've done that 5 times. Now, let's do that same thing with our eyes closed. So now we're breathing in and out through the nose. Our feet are firmly planted on the ground. They're breathing, and you're still talking, and you're saying no.
Now, what interception is that? When you've got your eyes closed, what are you doing?
Well, right. So many things, right? We're taking out the whole visual stimulus of what's going on and what we're seeing and what we think that person is thinking about me when I'm doing this exercise. But then what it also does, when we close those eyes, the other senses then ratchet up a little bit. So now, what are you hearing? Do you hear the birds outside? Do you hear the clock ticking? Do you hear other people breathing? Okay. Now, how does that make you feel? Right? There's just ways we can plug into this. And then depending on the class, I love to take that challenge when I do this with a group of people, is then to get them to do the same thing standing. Now we're standing, we're doing the same thing. Our eyes are open. Now our eyes are closed. Does that make us feel less grounded? Does that make us feel more insecure? Just acknowledge that and then shelve that, and let's move on to the next stimulus, right?
Yeah, so I'm really interested in the idea, and I can't ever remember, it's the exteroception, I think, when your eyes are closed.
Well, it's your proprioception, right? So your balance. And if you think about your just ability to stand with 2 feet on the ground or 1 foot on the ground and do that with eyes open and eyes closed, it's a very different experience. So I think all of those perceptions change a bit, eyes open, eyes closed. But as far as where we exist in time and space in the world, proprioception is going to be the most affected, which then, to your point, also affects exteroception, interoception, nocioception. But
that really just seems so important. If teachers understood that and could actually do that, and I can't imagine that you would want kids to have to do that like a routine, because that would then get to be not a habit, but a task. And I think what you're aiming for is that I would say to myself, if I felt a little out of kilter, that here are some things I can do, and say that within myself. Is that right?
Absolutely. For our adult population here in, Westport, Connecticut, and just our little main drag is a pretty stressful little road that we have to navigate. And this is something that our clients can practice, eyes open, of course, when they're driving. If they're feeling that stress, that if they start to just focus on their breath and see where that leads them, now they can be more aware of their surroundings instead of being so focused on that person that just cut them off, right? And being reactive to that, but instead just using this as a way to calm and ground and stay open.
So what questions do you have? Anybody have any questions that you'd like us to play around with? Are you suggesting yoga breathing in class, for example?
Yeah, so the breathing question is fascinating because there's a million different ways to breathe. There's box breathing. We use this method at TAP, which is really just a hybrid combination of like many different forms of breathing, which is this idea of trying to breathe in nasally and there's this great book called Breath on Breathing, and then really, 300 pages of the best thing to do. And it's a great book. Everyone should read it, but breathe in and out through the nose, more oxygen, better filtration system. If you can do that, fantastic. But if we can slowly breathe in for 5 seconds, hold that for 1 second, and then exhale for another 5 and hold that for 1, it's enough time to give people to be aware of what's happening, enough time to pause, and then enough time to move on and do it again. And then you can give them, in our world, different cues of what we want to focus on. And I imagine that would work in the classroom as well. You could do things like, as you're doing that, I want you to massage the palm of your hand, right? There, you could do that, and you could, slowly move your cervical spine. And what we're doing right now, right, is making different mind-body connections, showing that I can stay connected to my breath and stay connected to the way I'm moving and stay connected in my body, and not, like I was, distracted by all the million things that were going on around me in the classroom and not focused on myself. And those habits for children, ideally, just like the person driving a car, when they're home and they're doing homework and there's a million things they want to do, if they just take a moment and they focus on that breath, their breath will bring them to that zone. They don't have to get there forcefully. They can get there truly on a more unconscious level, even though they're consciously going through it because of the bridge of the breath.
So I know that since I've kind of talked to you a lot about habits of mind, you got intrigued enough to say, look at our core values. Can you talk about how it influenced your thinking as much as you have influenced mine? You certainly have taken on a lot of this understanding of what it means to build a habit that you value so much that you want to make it happen everywhere you go.
Yeah, I mean, it was so influenced by it. I stole the name of Habits of Movement, with your permission, of course. And again, it was one of those things where clearly it made sense that we wanted to make a habit of moving properly and moving well and efficiently. And then as we started putting this together and making it more of an approach, saying, well, sure, there's neural pathways that we are creating by doing these like proper movement patterns. So to do that, in your case, all the amazing exercises you do, and it's true that just the other day you had 2 of our clients stop you and say that you are the gold standard for everything that we do here. That is a fact, and it's very impressive. And it's not without resistance. You do push back from time to time. But
it's interesting.
Tell me.
Pushback isn't quite the right term.
Okay.
You always say trust.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to trust that the challenge that you're giving me is one I'm capable of doing. Mm-hmm. And when I push back, it's when I look at you with my eyebrows up and say, really? You think I can do that? And you say, try it. And I have to then get myself centered again to say, this is a challenge. Will I be safe trying it? And that's an interesting question, because that safety is something I have over our years of working together. I think that's what gets me to go beyond what I ever imagined I could do at my age.
Well, I mean, for 39, you're doing a lot of things really well. But the word that you kept and continue to use, which we use in our meetings of how we're going to grow this approach, is confidence. And how confidence as we age becomes a little more narrowed because we become more fragile. But what happens then is our world gets smaller and we're scared to do things, and we start moving in this really small controlled box, and that feels safe until that doesn't. And then that gets smaller. So the work that we've done, and there's been some slips, some step backs, but we get back up, we dust ourselves off, we bounce back. I mean, that's the word for you when I think about all that we've gone through beyond growth and your ability to recover, is this bounce back ability. And that's one of the things that we lose as we age. And it really starts different people differently, but kind of like the 4th decade into our 40s, we just notice it takes us a little while to recover from everything in life. And certainly the more strenuously we move, the more we need to put our bodies back together. So our approach has always been, if this, then that. right? If this feels safe, okay, now I'm going to push you a little bit more. And then you give me that look. And then you do it a little bit. And then I say, okay, now we're going to do it a little bit more. And then we say, now we've done enough. And next time you come back, maybe we'll do a little bit more.
So does that become a habit?
I believe so. I like to think so. I like to think that for us, we use this term a lot of trial, error, reassess. But in this case, it would be trial, success, reassess. And we do a little bit of both kind of in real time. And that's why it's always been hard to think about how to quantify this in some sort of like scalable event, because how does the person know that they're doing it well if they haven't been taught or coached by someone who is an expert in that? Are they really capable of doing these things on their own and doing it well? And I think what you've taught me is if we look at other areas, instead of just saying like, here's the movement, do this movement, this is how you do a squat. Okay, everyone can do that. But how do we give you ways to think about your thinking, think about your moving, and keep that connection of mind and body and kind of lean into, what area am I comfortable? Am I comfortable thinking about how uncomfortable I am? Okay, so let's start with nociception. Let's keep you in a place that causes no pain. And then we've accomplished that. Okay, now when you feel that pain, like, what does that bring up in you? Does it bring up anxiety? Does it bring up fear? What is that fear from? Do you've fallen in the past, you don't want to fall again? Okay, let's address that and let's give you some strategies. And in your case, those strategies have been now probably 7 hours of exercises that you use to put your body back together after activity. Not really 7 hours, but
Just feels like that.
And it feels like that for when you have guests over as well. There's like, oh, Ben, are you still stretching over there?
Yes, but it pays off. That's the thing. I see the benefit. And that's what I'm wondering. I think when we work with students with habits of mind, I think we have very much a comparable situation, because you're leaning in one direction, you're leaning in another. People often say, well, we work on managing impulsivity. But when you're managing your impulsivity, you're also probably persisting. And if you're persisting, you're probably also thinking flexibly. So you've got all those dynamics going in your brain and in your body mind. That's the part that really interests me, is that I believe that that body mind connection is because you've built confidence not only in your brain, but in what you're capable of doing. Like very often, I think kids build great confidence on skateboards. And can we take what they feel when they're on a skateboard to have them face an algebraic equation, for example? I believe you can transfer that, but you have to be so aware that that's the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating because I think of me now at 50. It's the first time I've said that, being 50, and all the work that I do here to practice, right? This is my training, this is my homework, so that I can go and I can ski or I can skateboard and I can do these things and I don't have to think about it, right? That it becomes effortless through the dedication of the practice here. But as I've gotten older, it's not about lifting more and running faster. It's more of being aware of my body in the state, in the gym. And like tonight, okay, am I feeling a little anxious because I'm not sure what's going to happen tonight? Okay, I believe I am. What do I want to do about it? I want to put on music that I know that soothes me, and I'm going to stand on a foam roller and activate the arches of my feet, right, which is a proprioceptive maneuver. And I'm going to play in between what I'm listening to and how that calms me, and then what's going on under the arch of my foot. And there's no judgment. There's not an outcome. I don't have to lift something 10 times at a certain weight to say that I did it. It's just, getting back to myself, getting back inside of my body and staying connected to the things around me through that mind-body connection.
You told me a story once that really struck me as being so interesting because it's related to what you're saying now.
I tell you a lot of stories that are interesting.
Not always, but the story that sort of struck me was when I had been injured and you were helping me to get better, to recover, as you would say. And I said that I would have pain, and I asked you, because I'm not one to take much medication of any sort. So I said, do you think it's okay if I take 2 Advil then? And you said, here's what I've learned. Before you take 2 Advil, get yourself in the most relaxed position you possibly can. Get the heating pad if you need to. Get anything that's going to just help you relax. Breathe. You showed me some things I could try to do. Give yourself at least 10 minutes before you decide whether, in fact, you need to take the Advil. And I discovered that 99% of the time, that was all I needed to do. So all the kind of work that we're doing about stress and drugs and kids and mental health, it just seems to me there's that confidence that you can find yourself, but it takes a certain confidence in the stillness of being.
Yeah, it's a very complicated subject when to medicate, and much of this is out of my scope of practice, especially when we're talking about kids and developmental learning, and physical pain is a little more in my scope of practice, but even as a chiropractor, it's still out of my scope. But the lesson there for all of us is to not be reactive in our choices to mask whatever feeling of being uncomfortable we are, but to see if there are other strategies that we can use short term. It doesn't have to be days. It could just be 10 minutes. And is there an alternative approach that we can take to just get more information from our body? And some of that more information is like, no, I'm really in pain and this hurts and I don't want to feel like this and I can't go on with my activities of daily living. So I do need that Advil, and that's great. And the problem with that sometimes is, and I've had surgeries and I've gone through the process and saying, well, I know what it was like when I had 6 screws put in my hand from a skiing accident. I don't want to feel that way again. And I have to stay in front of the pain and all these things that I was told by my amazing surgeons. True. But how do I know when to stop that? And for me, it was when appropriate, and I could start backing off the medication. How long could I go just before I'm uncomfortable? Not like a challenge, and then that became a learning lesson for me, is how long can I go before I take something to mask the uncomfortableness that I'm feeling? Or is there another strategy? And by the way, can I do both? Can I do all the things? And can I go on a stand-up paddleboard? And can I surf? Can I use a foam roller and do all of these things? And at the end of that, maybe I still want a beer, or maybe I still need Advil. That's okay. I've done what I could. I've used the tools that I've had to get a better understanding of myself, and I still need a little help.
I just feel like there's something so powerful in all of this, that if we could get this across to our kids, it would make such a difference in their lives. But, it takes a lot of self-care to be with kids. So let's just talk about that for a minute.
That is a really good point.
Because I think if I, as an adult, am feeling tense and tight, and I'm telling you to relax, I'm not so sure that's going to work.
Yeah.
So what are some tips that you can give us for teachers to kind of collect themselves when they're feeling the same stress? And I must say that there is nobody I admire more than early childhood teachers who have to get way down on the floor in order to make things work with these little kids shoulder to shoulder, and then get up again and they're over 50 years old. That ain't easy all day long.
No, absolutely not. Again, there's like 17 different pathways that I'm thinking of addressing this. So when that happens, I usually just start with myself, and then we can go from there. When I started this, I was really resistant to the idea that I needed to necessarily take care of myself, right? I could lift, I could run, I could do these things, and I'd work on people, I'd make them better. And the idea that I was taking on some of their physical, emotional stress was kind of ridiculous to me. Until I started taking home their physical and emotional stress. Wow, that guy's shoulder hurt. Now my shoulder kind of hurts. I wonder why that is. And what I learned was the strategies that I was using that worked for me, of lifting and running in a more like classical exercisey kind of way, they weren't enough. What I needed was more tools. So I started working one-on-one with a yoga instructor. And I had done yoga, but I didn't understand it. So I really wanted to understand the practice. So I did a trade of services, and she became my client and I became hers. And I had this amazing understanding. And I took that yoga and I took it to my lifting and my running, and I started to blend these practices. And I think for teachers, the lesson that I'm trying to teach and that I learned for myself is that sometimes the things that work for you repeatedly all the time may not always work for you all the time, because you're not the same person that you were. And I have this amazing, another 87-year-old client, and I keep hearing about how everything that she's done in her entire lifetime has worked for her. And I keep trying to say, but you're not that person. In fact, you're not the same person that you were yesterday. So although that's great, and you are hyper flexible, but you're a trip, slip, fall risk, maybe we need to work on stability. And it's little by little, because they're so good at being flexible. But are they? If they're tripping and slipping and potentially falling, maybe we need to work on something else. So my takeaway is, the larger skill set you have, the more things that you can plug into and use. And if you take that moment to self-assess, then you can kind of figure out where I want to lean into that day. And sometimes it's too much to think about. Like, I don't like thinking about myself all the time. I know it's hard for some people to believe, but I would love someone to tell me, you need to do this and you'll feel better. I need to have some input on that as well. And then maybe we can get there together.
Yeah. So, I mean, clearly a sense of agency matters a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're in control of it.
Mm-hmm.
And we either love the problems we have or we want to shed the problems we have. And I think sometimes we love the problems we have because they're safe and we feel comfortable and we know what they are. And if we solve them, now where are we? And Liz is commenting in the comments. She's saying, well, maybe we're taking a responsible risk. We're actually taking a chance on ourselves when we shift and change so that we get out of the rut that we're in. But that rut is so deeply rutted, it's hard sometimes.
Yeah, that's a neural groove as well that we have formed. And if there's one shortcut that works for everyone, I think it's having a recovery tool in your toolbox, right? So for us, that's a foam roller, right? And that foam roller could look like a tennis ball. And like I said, I can use that on the arch of my foot. But this idea that I'm helping to put my body back together. And current research shows that if I initiate that recovery after a workout within a 30-minute period, and it still works the longer it goes, but the sooner we can do it, the better, because the tissues are more infused with blood and they're more supple, and we can make a change in the density of that soft tissue. If I initiate that recovery, I start to initiate that recovery on a hormonal level as well. So cortisol goes down. I get into more of a healing state or reparative state, which we've always thought of. Well, that's why you sleep. You recover when you sleep. But what if you're stressed out or you don't sleep well? So if you initiate that recovery process earlier, if your jam is to do yoga or to go running or your martial arts or whatever, make sure that you have this recovery program that you can use to start changing how you feel, breathe, think, and function on a hormonal level. And that should help that person rolling around on the ground with kids and other.
Yeah. It's a tough profession,
Mm-hmm.
as you know.
Yeah.
You're teaching all the time yourself, so you know it is.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just shift for a minute and talk about your habits of movement. What are they?
Oh boy, I knew I was going to be tested on this. So there's 8 habits of movement. Our first one is resist. And we kind of talk between, are we resisting or are we persisting, right? So a little bit of both. And just globally, all these 8 habits of movement for us are kind of silos where we can put best practices. Oh, that's a really interesting thing that someone's doing on the internet using a resistant band. That works brilliantly for our resistance protocol, right? So we've got resistance, and it's kind of your warm up here at TAP and the different things that you do. For some people, that could just be moving in multi directions, right? So we've got resist, persist. We've got we've got power. I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit. So power is what we determine is some kind of like plyometric movement. And that could be something as easy as you standing on your toes and then dropping down to your heels, right? So this kind of shock to the system, and jumping, landing, changing of direction. And one of the things that you do is throwing like a ball on a trampoline, right? So that's a version of a plyometric exercise where you're getting some degree of power component to it. So we also have stability, right? So that's a big part of what you do, standing on one leg, and your ability to lunge and move directions and bend to one side or balance on one foot. So things where you're standing on one leg or challenging someone's, again, that box that we move in, making it a little bit larger for them. So resist, persist, power, stability. We have elasticity. So elasticity is our stretching, really, in different ways that we can stretch, whether we're using a rope or using your own body, whether someone's assisting you, you're doing it on your own. We have two, which are hand in hand, which are recover and grow. So recover is any sort of soft tissue mobilization, right? So that's a foam roller, that's your own hand, that's a tennis ball, breaking up adhesions in the soft tissue. And then a big, big hack to the system that we have found is this idea of growing. So after we break down the soft tissue, that's good. But now I need to put proper lines of stress into that soft tissue to get it to grow the way that you want to. So if I just foam rolled my low back and I sat in a chair immediately afterwards, well, I broke up that fascia, but now it's growing in the same forward flex state that I was just in that was causing pain. So I should move in an opposite or opposing direction to get that tissue to grow in that direction. And what did I miss? Did I get them all?
I think you got them all.
Balance and flow.
Oh,
I think I forgot balance and flow. So balance is just more of stability, really, more multi-joint dynamic movements. And flow is that same sort of mentality, but taken more into how do I do this outside in the exterior world, more functional movements that may be more, in the fitness world, they call it things like animal type movements, like crawling around, or even like early developmental movements of like rolling and crawling, things like that. So those are habits of movement.
They're habits of movement directly connected to your four main things here, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So it's moving in through time and space.
Mm-hmm.
It's being aware of everything around you, but doing that all with elasticity, with balance, so those are the ways that I understand that they kind of marry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the goal is hopefully is to really work and use this on a more diagnostic level, but still intuitive, where if someone comes in and they're really in pain, well, that's an easy one. We know that you need recover and grow, right? If someone comes in and they're like highly interoceptive, they're almost everything, they're just so aware of everything, like almost like a hypochondriac, right? Like just so in my head about everything. Okay, well, how do we get you out of that? Well, if I'm giving you like power exercises and you're throwing a ball on a trampoline, it's coming back at your face, it's an easy way to get you out of your head, right?
or it gets you right in the head.
And I have seen that happen. So the goal is in the future is that how can we make this and almost automatize this in the form of an app or AI that can help people just answer a series of questions. And here's some baseline exercises that you can do to help bring you back to your body and body awareness and kind of bring you back to center.
So we're about to close this beautiful conversation. I'm so, it's fun to talk to somebody who's not every day in the education space and yet so much in the education space. So what I'd like you to do is just share with the group of people who are with us how they can take that self-measurement and kind of learn what you are talking about. And if they don't live in Westport, Connecticut, that's too bad. I'm really sorry for them, but maybe there's some things they can do, because I know you've graphically represented the 8 habits of movement in a beautiful way.
Yeah, thank you. So we have a beta test going on right now, and it's our body awareness assessment, and you can take it on our website at tapstrength.com. And
go slow. It's tapstrength.com.
Thank you. I get very excited talking about this. So tapstrength.com. You can also find us on Instagram at tapstrength. So this body awareness assessment ask us a series of questions. And because it is beta and there's already flaws, but we'd love your feedback if you take the test on telling us how we can make a better test. And I'm sure the teachers can really help us with this. But it's our way to get people to just see where they're a little more focused and a little more balanced in these 4 components of body awareness. And then, on Instagram, we have, I think, a fair amount of like fun tips and examples of clients that we work with. We're responsive there as well. If someone's like, hey, I've got a bad back and I know you can't diagnose me, but are there some things that just kind of work for my back? And then we'll try to put up a series of videos kind of role playing what that question is. And then, we're always available if someone wants to do a telehealth call or just have a call and have some questions about what they're doing and how we can help. We're happy to do that. And then, hopefully the future will hold something that's a little more dynamic and interactive for people where they can feel like they're having the experience of working with one of us through, an interactive app. And then ultimately the goal is to create a certification program to certify trainers or teachers or physical education teachers to be TAP certified, and then they can use these strategies with their students and clients.
Well, that will be the day.
That'll be the day.
That's great. So thank you so much. And just remember that you can be in touch with EJ, and he is very receptive and open to learning. He is a continuous learner, as a matter of fact. Well done.
Thank you.
And we are looking forward to seeing you, because we are going to be looking at our next habit, which is taking a responsible risk, which is very tied to what we've been talking about tonight. So thank you so much for joining us, and see you next time.